the heels of divorce and disappointment, they found each other.
When she got engaged to him, she was just beaming.
Until one fall afternoon when she suddenly goes missing.
She had shown up for church, and into the evening, she didn't show up.
There was a hole in the wall over the phone. There was actually some hair around the hole.
There was a bed and a bed frame that was missing from the basement of the house.
The feeling almost from the beginning was this was not a missing persons case.
Detectives uncover a suspect with an axe to grind.
She could be very ornery, especially if she'd been drinking.
That just caused a worse row between them.
It's a little bit suspicious that it took until late in the evening for him to call the police.
Things just started to spin out of control.
And an unlikely accomplice leads investigators to the truth.
Once the gate opened, it just opened. Everything came out.
And I was told also in the house was his daughter. That immediately seemed odd to me.
She just couldn't handle somebody sleeping in the bed she used to sleep in.
There was a catastrophic house fire where somebody had died in the house.
This obviously was a story of jealousy, a murder of jealousy.
What's the old saying? Hell hath no fury like a woman scorned?
October 25th, 1998, Jerome County, Idaho. It's just after 11 p.m. on a chilly fall night when the Jerome County Sheriff's Office gets a call from local man Milo Ross. Milo is concerned about his fiancée, Maida Jones.
Milo Ross had reported his fiancée missing. She had not shown up for church. She also didn't show up for the family dinner after.
Additionally, Milo says he and his teenage son Paul found signs inside the home that something is amiss.
He called them to say, hey, we smell cleaner in the house. We think we found a bullet hole or something that looks like blood.
When officers arrive at the home, Milo and Paul lead them to the dining room.
There was some carpet that looked like it had been recently cleaned.
There was actually some hair around the hole.
It was about 5.5 feet up the wall. You could see the brass coloration, something inside the hole that looked like it was a bullet.
Things like that, obviously, as an investigator, would raise some pretty big red flags.
They knew, based on the evidence that they were seeing, there was some foul play involved, obviously.
Officers immediately summon homicide detectives to the scene. When investigators arrive, they begin collecting details about the missing woman, Maida Jones.
I met with Milo Ross. He was concerned about his fiancée being missing. You kind of have to assume that you're looking at something more than a missing person.
Maida Jones spent her childhood on an idyllic farm in southern Idaho.
She was born in 1952, and she grew up on her family ranch in Lake Channel. When she was growing up, she liked to obviously be outside with her family, tending her ranch.
Maida thrived in her rural upbringing, but struggled to find fulfillment in her love life. After 2 marriages led to 2 divorces, Maida focused her energy on raising her 4 children.
As a mother, she was very caring to her children. Her kids were always involved in sports in high school, and she never missed a game. She always had 2 to 3 different jobs, trying to make the best for her kids and her family.
In 1997, 45-year-old Maida met a handsome new suitor, Milo Ross.
She was working actually as a waitress at the Hilltop Cafe in American Falls, and Milo was managing trucks at that time, and they crossed paths at that cafe.
He's quiet. He has the appeal of authority. He doesn't need to say anything. He was a boss, you know what I mean? We always showed him respect.
Milo, a devout Mormon, confided in Maida that he was going through a difficult divorce. After 17 years and 2 kids, he and his soon-to-be ex, Sandra Jonas, had reached the end of their marriage. Sandra was Milo's second wife, and when they originally met, Sandra was in her mid-20s.
She had just got out of the army, and she needed a job, and I was getting ready to leave for college, so I asked her if she wanted to be my boss. And then I asked Milo if she could take my job. They began to like each other, spent time together. He's a big, tall, good-looking dude, and she was the little short lady, the stick of dynamite, you know? She liked him.
Both Sandra and Milo grew up in the Mormon church, but as things grew serious between the young couple, Sandra made it clear that religion wouldn't be a part of their future.
It was all witchery to her. It was makeup to try and make people feel good about the terribleness and the awkwardness of life.
In 1981, 27-year-old Sandra and 38-year-old Milo married.
My parents were married on the 1st of May, 1981, in Elko, Nevada. They went down and were married in front of the Justice of the Peace.
Within a few years of marriage, Sandra and Milo had a son and daughter, Paul and Andre. When it came to parenting, Sandra took the driver's seat.
She was very strict. She was headstrong. She had a strong personality. And when she gave a command or a look, you obeyed.
Sandra didn't sugarcoat her feelings about religion with her kids.
If you brought up any sort of religious topic, she would just fly off the handle. She'd berate and just ridicule.
But Sandra couldn't stop Paul from growing curious about the church she abandoned.
I started attending a church when I was about 7, going on 8 years of age. And then some short time later, my father started going with us, with me and my sister, and then my mother put her foot down and said, no more. And so we stopped going to church.
When Paul was in his early teens, he sought out the church once again. Milo supported him, but this time they hid their Sunday outings from Sandra.
Milo and the kids wanted to go to church, and she forbid them to go, but they went anyway. They had to sneak off to go.
I think a lot of things just sort of started to spin out of control in our home. It was very tumultuous after about 13 or 14 years of age.
Over the next few years, tensions between Sandra and Milo grew.
That finally sort of boiled up into about 1997 or so. I graduated from high school. My parents separated.
While finalizing his divorce from Sandra, Milo's new friendship with waitress Maida Jones was a breath of fresh air.
My dad had first told me about Maida when I was at college at Utah State. And I had learned that, he had taken an interest in her. And so he was going to maintain his arm length.
Milo took Maida under his wing and helped the single mother of 4 secure a stable job.
She actually worked with Milo. She was a dispatcher for Circle A, dispatching trucks.
Got to know Maida quite a bit more. I thought she was a great woman. Just very, very kind. There was nothing about her that I didn't like.
It wasn't long before Maida and Milo started a relationship.
Maida's dream in life was to have a good life with a good man and raise her kids that way. So I'm assuming that she saw in him that that's what she would have with him.
In May of 1998, Milo's divorce from Sandra was official. Around the same time, Maida found herself in need of a place to stay.
At some point, she was having some remodeling done on her home, and so she ended up staying in the guest bedroom in our house.
The couple agreed they wouldn't share a bed before marriage. In October, Milo decided he wanted that day to come sooner rather than later.
He pulled me aside and showed me a ring that he had purchased and that he was planning on inviting Maida to marry him.
Milo proposed on October 23rd, and Maida said yes.
When she got engaged to him, she was just beaming. A lot of people would say that she was the happiest that she was ever with Milo.
Just 2 days after their engagement, Maida spent the morning preparing a pot roast for a mission trip send-off for her soon-to-be stepson, Paul. She urged Milo and the kids to head on to the church while she finished up at home.
He was going, I think, to England on a 2-year Mormon mission, and it was customary for the LDS religion to have a farewell at their church and have family and friends over to listen to him speak, to kind of give his farewell.
She was going to meet them at the church. She had stayed behind to start cooking food for the dinner after church.
But Maida never showed. Milo tells detectives that upon returning home to check on Maida, he began noticing a number of worrisome clues.
The roast was still in the oven, and it had completely burned to a crisp, which was not like Maida. My dad said something's just not right.
Based on Milo's observations and their own, Jerome County Sheriff's detectives fear the worst.
And they noticed what they thought looked like a bullet hole in the wall and a little bit of blood splatter on the wall. Smell of cleaning solution.
The feeling almost from the beginning was this was not a missing persons case. We were almost immediately convinced we were looking for a body.
Try to make sense of more bizarre clues.
There was a bed and a bed frame that was missing from the basement of the house.
And a snap judgment pays off.
And that's one of the smartest decisions I've made in my career.
Just 2 days after accepting a marriage proposal from her boyfriend, Milo Ross, 46-year-old Maida Jones is missing.
She was very excited. She was telling everybody that she got engaged and how excited she was. She loved Milo. She was very happy with him.
Around 1:30 a.m., Jerome County investigators gather at Maida's home to speak with her fiancé and his children.
I met with Milo Ross and his son Paul, and I was told also in the house was his daughter. She was 16, 17 years old at that time. Her name was Sandra Ross, and that she was sick and was in bed.
She was in her bedroom downstairs, and she told her dad she was feeling ill and didn't want to talk.
That immediately seemed odd to me. If your soon-to-be stepmother's missing, you just go to bed, the police are there, lots of activity. I would think if it wasn't something life and death, she would probably be out there seeing what was going on.
With Andre self-sequestered to her room, detectives try to feel out Milo and 19-year-old Paul.
Paul was pretty quiet. Most of my conversation with Milo seemed just, appropriately concerned and kind of lost and confused about, things going on and, as distracted as you would expect.
Paul explains that when Maida didn't show up for his mission trip send-off at the church, they considered the possibility that she'd gone into work.
She worked the graveyard shift and she did not show up to work. And so they had called the house asking where Maida was. At 11 o'clock, about 11:30.
Neither Milo nor Paul could really explain why she wouldn't show up or that she wouldn't come home that evening, go to work, all that. They were just kind of perplexed by the whole thing.
She was going to come back for sacrament meeting, but she never appeared. My sister was going to come, and she never showed up. So we knew something was happening.
Based on detectives' initial impression, Maida doesn't fit the typical
Turn up missing, and especially without some major event, fight with the husband or wife, or something like that precedes them going missing, losing a job, an event like that. There was no event. In fact, she was engaged to be married. Her soon-to-be stepson was going on a mission for the church. She had a job. No known reason for her to go missing.
Detectives ask Milo and Paul to take a look around the house to see if anything is missing or out of place. In the dining room, the father and son point out a few oddities.
We realized that the newspapers, the 5 or 6 newspapers that were on the dining room table, were all gone. And that the carpet underneath the dining room table, the throw rug, was also gone.
The other thing that we determined during the process of this is that there was a bed and a bed frame that was missing from the basement of the house. We were told that that was where the victim had been sleeping. So there's some question as to why that bed's missing.
Why would an intruder take such strangely specific items but leave actual valuables behind? In order to piece together what went on in Milo's house, investigators call on a mobile crime lab for assistance.
We're a very small organization, and we don't have crime scene techs, and we don't have people who do that.
It will be morning before the crime lab makes the 100-mile drive from Pocatello. To preserve the evidence, detectives secure Milo's home.
I made the decision that we were going to move everybody out of the house. We instructed them to just take a change of clothes and some personal items, and everything else was to stay in the home.
They were asking us to grab toothbrushes and whatever else we needed to stay the night somewhere else.
Milo gathers his family, including his 17-year-old daughter, Andre, who emerges from her room for the first time since detectives arrived.
Extremely quiet, looking down, would not make eye contact with me at all. Her face was just as white as a sheet. And I'd asked Milo about that again, and like he said, she'd been up throwing up most of the night, had an upset stomach, but didn't sleep at all.
As the family prepares to leave, Andre speaks up with a request for detectives.
The daughter, Andra, wanted to take her pickup with her. I thought about it and I decided that no, we would give everybody a ride. There'd be no reason for them to have their cars, so everything would stay on the property.
She was very honest. The pickup was part of the crime scene, so we obviously decided not to release the pickup.
Nobody's a suspect at that point, but we wanted to control the scene. And Milo Ross agreed, and we arranged for a hotel room for the family.
The next morning, as detectives await the arrival of the mobile crime lab, they begin outreach in an attempt to find Maida.
Everybody pretty much were shocked that Maida would not show up for work, that she wouldn't have shown up at church, that her and Milo's relationship seemed to be pretty good, and that she was a good worker at her job, and that she hadn't called in sick, never had a period of time when she just didn't show up for work, and all that was fairly early on fell in line with the fact that she didn't go missing on her own.
Detectives also verify Milo's alibi.
With Milo, it was fairly early on that his story of being in church, being at the dinner, he was never really alone. Some of Sandra's family saw him at the dinner. He and Paul were together at the house after the events. Andra came home a little bit later. She didn't go to church. We pretty much established a timeline for the movements of Milo and Paul during the course of the early part of the investigation.
At 1 p.m. on October 27th, investigators get word that the crime lab has arrived at Milo's home. Partnering with the technicians, detectives search for new evidence.
We went into the house, and I'm videotaping everything that you see in the house, taking photographs.
Shortly after arriving, crime scene technicians retrieve a single bullet from inside the dining room wall.
It was badly misshapen. It was a small caliber. Those of us that looked at it believe that it was probably a .22 round.
Outside the home, Detective Kennedy takes a look at Andre's truck.
I walked back, saw the pickup, made a closer look at it, and almost immediately what rang out to me as I walked towards the back of the pickup was coming under the tailgate. To me, looked like bloodstains.
It looked like blood had run out of the bed of the truck and was dried on the back bumper. that was Sandra Ross's pickup, the same pickup she had wanted to take with her. It's the first thing I thought of. I thought that's one of the smartest decisions I made in my career, is not allowing somebody to take their vehicle from the crime scene.
Coming up, investigators zero in on their most compelling, but a surprise witness sends them in an unexpected direction.
She had said that her daughter could be very ornery, especially if she'd been drinking.
Less than 24 hours after 46-year-old Maida Jones was reported missing, detectives have just discovered blood on the bumper of a vehicle driven by her soon-to-be stepdaughter, Andre Ross.
It looked like somebody had actually attempted to clean it, but they were able to confirm that it was human blood that was found in the back of the pickup.
The fact that Andra had wanted to take that pickup raised a huge red flag, and she became what we called now a person of interest. Back then we'd say a suspect. And I knew that we needed to focus a little bit more on her.
While detectives have yet to piece together exactly what happened, the blood on the pickup confirms their worst suspicions.
We pretty much assumed at that point that we were dealing with a homicide and that Meta was no longer with us, and so it was not a missing persons case from that moment on.
Before investigators get a chance to question Andre, they are contacted by her maternal grandmother, Colleen Jonas. Colleen tells detectives that she fears her daughter Sandra, Milo's ex-wife, might have had something to do with Maida's disappearance.
Colleen had said that her daughter could be very ornery and that she could be mean when she was drinking. I know, and that she had an alcohol problem.
Colleen tells the detective that her daughter's drinking contributed to the end of her 14-year marriage to Milo.
He quit drinking and she didn't, and then he started going back to church and getting back in the religion, and that just caused a worse row between them.
My parents separated about 1997 or so, and my parents were divorced, I believe, in May of 98.
Milo and her got separated and divorced, and then she went to work doing road construction, and it took her up to Sun Valley, and so she borrowed my mom's trailer, and she was living up there, and she lost a lot of weight, and she was looking really good. She seemed like she was happy, but she still loves Milo.
Colleen said that Sandra had never accepted the divorce. In her mind, her and Milo, although they weren't legally married, they were still together.
I'm enraged.
She just couldn't handle somebody taking her place, being around her kids, living in the house she used to live in, sleeping in the bed she used to sleep in, and it wasn't her.
Adding fuel to the fire, Sandra learned about Paul's mission trip.
Sandra was very anti-LDS at that time. She was upset that her son was going on a mission, kind of blamed Meta for directing him in that pursuit.
Colleen tells detectives that when she saw Sandra on the morning Maida disappeared, her daughter was even more bad-tempered than usual, and she was armed.
Sandra had been seen with a .22 caliber pistol on Sunday afternoon. And she had even made a comment that to her mother, I believe it was, that she should kill Meta. If a mother says, I think my child did this, then you spend a little more time weighing that against everything.
While investigators look into Sandra's whereabouts, they come across another possible clue.
We found out that Sandra had a storage unit in Burley. The sheriff took the lead on that search warrant.
At the front of the unit, investigators spot a promising piece of evidence.
And they noticed that there was a blue paper towel outside the door of the storage unit that looked like it had some blood smears on it. They opened up the storage unit. They found a bed frame, mattress, box springs, cleaning supplies, blood residue on them. We determined during the process that was the bed and bed frame missing from the basement.
Now, investigators must determine whether Sandra is trying to cover her own tracks or someone else's. And the blood found in Andre's truck doesn't bode well for the 17-year-old.
During this time, I'm also trying to piece together Sandra's movements on Sunday, and also trying to find out where she is probably at right now. But we didn't have what we needed to make an arrest on Sandra. Andrea was definitely a suspect at that point.
The circumstantial evidence in this case was overwhelming. Obviously, the daughter knew what had happened, but hadn't been interviewed at this point and made any kind of confession.
Hoping to get answers, detectives go straight to 17-year-old Andre.
Every moment counts, but you also have to proceed pretty cautiously because you're not going to get a second chance to get that confession.
They locate Andre at a home where she is staying.
We're staying at a home of some people in their church about a mile from their house. The people they were staying with were very active in the church. I suspected that come around 10 o'clock, the family would be praying for a safe return. Emotions were going to be high. That's the time that I wanted to show up to talk to Andrew. I asked Milo if I could speak with him and his daughter, Andrea, because she's still a minor, and he gave permission for me to talk to her. And I asked Andrea if she was willing to talk to me about what had happened with Meta. And she looked at her dad, asked him to leave the room.
Alone with Andre, investigators encourage her to open up.
You have to pretty much say, yeah, we know. Nothing's going to shock us. You just go ahead and tell us.
But what she says does come as a shock.
She proceeded to tell me, one thing that you got to know before we start. I said, what's that? She goes, the head's not with the body.
Once the gate opened, it just opened, and just everything came out.
Andre tells detectives it started when Sandra asked her to help retrieve a bed from Milo's home. The bed Meta had been sleeping on.
She heard that Meta was living in the house, sleeping in a bed that Sandra thought was her bed. She wasn't going to allow that to happen. She was so obsessed with getting that bed out of that house.
She agreed to help her mother transport the bed in her truck on Sunday while the rest of the family was still at church.
So they go to the house, and Meta is in the kitchen. And her and Sandy start yelling at each other. Sandra tells Sandra to go down in the basement and wait for her.
Andre claims she did as her mother asked.
Andrew says, I hear loud voices and arguing, and then I hear a gunshot. A few seconds later, she hears a second gunshot. Her mother tells her, stay in the basement, I've got a mess to clean up. And after a little bit, says that her mother called her to come upstairs because she needed help. And she says that Meta's body was wrapped in the area rug.
She claims she didn't see the actual shooting, but heard the two gunshots, and the mother wanted her to help her get rid of the body and help clean up, which she did.
Together, they loaded Meta's body into the pickup truck, placing the bed frame on top.
Then they drove a mile or so from the house along the canal, which is a truck, and she says that she saw through the mirror her mom disrobed Meta's body and then using a hunting knife cut her head off. Her mother threw her head into the canal, dragged the body out to the canal as well, and when her mom came back, he told her, don't worry, nobody will ever be able to identify her if they do find her.
After dumping the body, they took the bed frame to Sandra's storage locker in Burley. Andre returned home and went straight to bed.
She was very believable with her story. It matched with the physical evidence that we found in her pickup. It matched with the fact the rug's missing and there was blood droplets on the back step. But You didn't find blood droplets on the sidewalk leading to the driveway, that kind of stuff.
Following Andre's confession, Detective Chatterton has a tough conversation with her father, Milo.
We didn't handcuff her at that time, I don't believe. And when we came out of the room, I explained to Milo what we had learned and that she was going to go to the sheriff's office with us. He wasn't greatly upset. He was just kind of accepting of what was going on.
As they transport Andre to the station, detectives have one more stop to make.
She'd helped her mom transport the body out to the canal. She was with her when the body was disposed of in the canal and when the head was severed from the body.
I asked her to take us to where this happened.
Coming up, detectives attempt to recover Maida's remains.
They were able to shut the water off at the Milner Dam.
Our searchers had noticed a severed human head on the canal bank.
And as detectives close in on a killer, a chilling piece of evidence falls into their laps.
Something small and shiny fell to the floor, and both of us looked at that as it bounced and landed on the floor.
On October 26, 1998, escorted by Jerome County investigators, 17-year-old Andre Ross leads detectives to the spot where her mother, Sandra Jonas, dumped the body of 46-year-old Maida Jones.
She led us on the path to where they went with Maida, and she threw the canal. At that point, that becomes another crime scene.
Investigators put in a request to have the canal drained.
They were able to shut the water off at the Milner Dam, but it did take about 8 or 9 hours for it to drain low enough to start searching that canal.
We knew we weren't going to get started till the next morning, so the plan was to have other people kind of come and secure the secondary site, and then just lining up divers to help us.
Back at the station, detectives officially place Andre under arrest.
We charged her with accessory to murder, and then we immediately began working on a warrant to have Sandra arrested.
My mom was, she was very strict. So I wasn't surprised that when I found out my sister was there that she ended up having to participate. And I think I would have had to have participated as well.
Detectives decide to wait until morning to execute the arrest warrant for Sandra.
In rural homes like this, if you go up in the dark, could she get away from us? She's going to know why we're there if we go up and start beating on the door. And so the tactical decision was to wait until she came out to go to work the next morning and then take her into custody.
Now, 2 days after Maida was reported missing, detectives get word from officers at the canal.
As we were waiting for the arrest to take place, the sheriff had advised me that the canal water had been dropping down since about 11 o'clock and that our searchers had noticed a severed human head on the canal bank. The human head doesn't float if it's severed from the body. It weighs roughly 8 pounds, and when you fling it out into the water, it's going to reach the apex of your throw, hit the water, and sink. And that's literally where we found the head.
But Maida's body didn't stay put.
The body floated downstream about a mile and a half.
Detectives transport the recovered remains to the medical examiner for autopsy. Then, they get word that Sandra was taken into custody in Blaine County on her way into work.
It is the first contact that any police had had directly with her involving this case.
Detective Chatterton comes face to face with Sandra as she is booked. While taking inventory of her personal items, investigators make a shocking discovery in her pockets.
It was a typical 5 inches in length, with a very sturdy handle, and it was a sturdy, broad knife. It wasn't a flimsy one like a fillet knife. It was a hunting knife.
Detective Chatterton discovers that's not the only thing Sandra's been carrying around.
When the property was being taken off of her person, something small and shiny came out of her pocket and fell to the floor. Both of us looked at that as it bounced and landed on the floor.
Dan hears this ding, 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 and he looks down, and there's Meta Jones's ring rolling down the floor.
I scooped it up, and it was just the top of a diamond ring. The band itself was cut off from that. The significance of finding the head of the ring with the decapitation of the victim, kind of a chilling thing.
Shortly after booking Sandra, police get confirmation of what they already suspected. The medical examiner verifies that the head and body found in the canal belong to Maida.
The dentist that did the records, did the x-rays, and took all the photos, compared it with her family dentist, who had record of all of her dental records. The cause of death was gunshot wound to the head. There were two. There was one below her, I think it was her right eye, and then one behind the ear.
Milo is able to verify that the ring Sandra had in her pocket was indeed the one he gave to Maida.
Milo had a receipt for the ring that he had purchased for Meta. That is the same diamond that was sold to Milo.
As the evidence piles up against Sandra, prosecutors and investigators feel confident about their chances of putting her away for good. Still, they keep digging.
We're doing a murder investigation, so we're just kind of going back and looking to see if there was, any issues with violence in her past, and this came up.
Detectives learn that 8 years ago, a mysterious fire broke out in the home of Milo's first wife, Vicky.
My dad, he had met Vicky. They were married in 1961, and I believe they were divorced 1980 or so.
She had a catastrophic house fire where somebody had died in the house. Nobody ever conducted a serious interview with Vicky, the only survivor of the house fire.
Was Maida Sandra's first victim, or had Sandra Jonas killed before? Coming up, the investigation expands yet again, and Sandra's motive crystallizes.
That was her home, her husband, her children. As Jerome County investigators continue to build their case against accused murderer Sandra Jonas, they find evidence that Maida Jones may not have been her first victim. 8 years prior, a mysterious fire broke out at the home of Milo Ross's first wife, Vicky.
There was a house fire, somebody died. Vicky had some very strong and definite concerns about the fire. That it occurred shortly after the last confrontation that she'd had with Sandra.
Vicky explains to police that she and Milo had remained in touch throughout his marriage to Sandra, and Sandra didn't like it.
She started out with making threats towards Vicky, and then a few short weeks later, then we have, the fire at the house.
But while investigators have plenty of questions about the fire, the 8-year-old case is already closed.
The state fire marshal's office wasn't willing to relook at that because they had seen it as an accidental electrical fire. So there would be no way we could present that as evidence.
Though never charged with starting the fire, the confrontations between the two women could be an indication of a motive towards Maida.
It shows the violent attitude that Sandra has, especially when it comes to anyone in a relationship with Milo, and it kind of corroborated the potential motive of why Sandra would be so upset that another woman's sleeping in the house that she considers to be hers, in a bed that she considered to be hers, and in a relationship with the man she considered to be her husband. The circumstance of Meta having stayed behind that morning and fixing food for their family dinner, it just led to the perfect storm. This was brewing for a long time. And the main catalyst is she never accepted the divorce between her and Milo. That was her home, her husband, her children.
Even with all the evidence stacked against her, Sandra refuses to confess. In December 1998, Andre accepts a plea. As part of her deal, she agrees to take the stand against her mother.
She was charged as a juvenile. Rate with the state in prosecuting her mother was taken into account.
Andre is sentenced to 2 years probation.
Personally, I don't think she should have gotten anything. I think she was reacting to what her mother basically told her to do. You know, you either do this or else.
Almost 10 months later, in July 1999, prosecutors learned that Sandra is ready to talk about a deal.
Initially, we charged her with first-degree murder, and through the process of negotiations and pretrial, she pled guilty to second-degree murder and was sentenced to 25 to life.
This obviously was a story of jealousy, a murder of jealousy.
To strip a victim naked, cut her head off, take an artifact from her body, the engagement ring, that was pretty heinous. That goes up there on the list of some of the worst things you could do to somebody.
What's the old saying? Hell hath no fury like a woman scorned. I think she just couldn't handle somebody taking her place. Being around her kids, living in the house she used to live in, sleeping in the bed she used to sleep in, and it wasn't her.
The most tragic part of this thing is that all could have been prevented. I don't put any responsibility on Maida. I don't put any on Andre. I don't put any on me or my Aunt Jackie or my grandma. But on my mom alone. My mom doesn't recognize that she's done anything wrong, and I don't know that she ever will.
Such a wonderful woman was taken from our family in such a tragic way that was super unnecessary, and it didn't need to happen. She just missed out on so many good things in her life.